Okay, so this is going to be a recording for the audio lectures of chapter 10, 11 and 12. To be precise, chapter 10 network security, chapter 11 operating system security, and chapter 12 application software security. All of these are related to information security, so anyone else who's taking some other course should just ignore this video. Anyways, since we've already discussed some of the topics from chapter 10 of network security in class, I'm going to briefly go through them all over again so as to keep a consistency with this chapter. Okay, so chapter 10 is about network security. Up to this point in the course, we've been talking about information security in general. Now we're looking at some specific issues. So network security is extremely important because obviously most of the attacks are going to be coming in from network security, avenues. And most of them happen because there are either going to be mistakes on the part of those who have designed the networks themselves, because there are weaknesses in the infrastructure. Like any physical structure, a network infrastructure has its weaknesses, or because the devices that have been used, or the kind of the configuration of those devices is not up to the level for the required security. So it could even also happen from any kind of physical outages. The devices going offline or the networks not being available are also reasons for why this may happen. Okay, so as network dependency goes, we're becoming more and more dependent on it. You can obviously understand that almost practically everything these days is network based. You also need to understand that without networks, you're practically useless. So there are some examples that the book quotes. For instance, it talks about the fact that networks are so important that when in 2013 there was civil unrest in Sudan, when the country eventually, of course, split into two. So during that time, the government, in trying to control the protesters and the aggregators, what they did was they just shut down the internet service for the entire country. What they essentially did was remove all the routing configurations from the routing tables. I've already discussed what they are. If you want to read about them, Google them. Anyways, so the point is, Sudan therefore became completely offline and the access was not there until 24 hours. And that effectively had a tremendous effect on the social, personal and businesses of Sudan. So that's just one example. That's an extreme example, but similar kind of things can actually happen. There could even be denial of service attacks or distributed denial of service attacks that can cause severe damage to your business and to your organization. So in this particular chapter, that's what we'll be covering through. Remember that this is a very, very basic explanation. This course is not designed, neither is this chapter designed to give you a lot of technical insight into these topics. So take them as they go. So protecting our network actually requires us to understand the kind of threats that we have and to try and prepare for them. So this can be done better by knowing how to actually design your network better. So the security of networks should be based on the design of those networks themselves. If you've properly designed your networks, half of your problem would probably be solved. And a well-configured and a patched network. What do I mean by patched? I mean, all the softwares running on those networks, all the protocols that you're running should be patched and should be up to date. As long as that happens, most of those attacks can either be completely prevented or mitigated altogether. Or even if they do happen, you could easily come out of it quite safely. Now, one of the ways in which you can actually protect your network is through a process called network segmentation. And as the name implies, that basically means that you would divide your network into smaller networks. So think of it in a manner, if you've got a really large network, if you divide it in segments, you're basically isolating the possible damage that could be done to you. So at any given time, if an attack happens, only one segment of your network would actually get damaged, not the entirety of the system. So this actually helps in how shall we say, controlling and organizing, and what is referred to as damage control. Okay. Secondly, another advantage of network segmentation is to boost your network performance. So by dividing them into segments, you can actually monitor their performance and then therefore control it better and optimize it better. So also, for troubleshooting perspectives as well, network segmentation is a good idea, because then if you've got segments, you can actually target specific portions of it and go and repair them and make them work better if they're causing problems. So these are some examples of why network segmentation is actually a good thing. Also, the one that pertains to us is that network segmentation allows you to monitor the kind of traffic you're getting into or outside that specific segment of the network. And in this way, you can actually prevent any kind of access that you don't want, or you can prevent any kind of network access that goes from within the network to the outside network for any particular area. This is exactly how blocking of different sites and different services actually works. So another design factor that could be really helpful for network security as a whole is to start funneling your network traffic through a specific portion. Think of it as an analogy of a large room where you decide to have only one exit and one entry, and you actually ask guards to stand there, or people who have authority to stand there, so that they can decide who to allow to enter in and who to allow to leave. And then in this way you can monitor. Now this would obviously cause a lot of network traffic to be slowed down, but at least this way you can control the kind of data that moves in or out. Plus, if I've got several such rooms with such doors or gateways which are acting essentially like choke points, then I can actually find out and I can actually control the kind of network traffic that flows from one segment to another segment. Okay, and that can help me in several ways. For instance, this is exactly how firewalls or proxies can actually control traffic, and we'll be discussing them, or how I can control my network traffic to or from a web server or an email server or some specific service. So this would allow me a lot of control and a lot of liberty in order to monitor the kind of data that is going out and coming into that particular network segment. Furthermore, there's another kind of a technique that can actually help in network security, and that is referred to as redundancy. Now, redundancy in a network design, as the English word itself implies, redundancy means something that is extra. So similar to how you actually have backup plans or extra devices or extra equipment in case a particular equipment or a particular device fails, you have redundancy in your network design, which essentially means that you've got several devices that are like a backup. So even if a couple of them fail, even if the infrastructure fails of a certain area, there are some portions of the network that are still functional. So you can use them and then route the traffic, as we just mentioned, through those workable places. So it is basically going to allow you to, yes, it will be bad, the service won't be working as well as it was, but at least you will have some service. So good network design includes a good redundancy plan. It actually includes redundancy for several of your devices, so that if your devices are failing or the connectivity is lost or somebody actually tries to attack them through network or even physically causes them damage, your network would still technically be working. So this is another one. Also, we also have backup networks to the internet itself. If, for instance, that's how all good networks are designed. So even if one of your connections to the internet is disconnected somehow, the second one works. This is what usually happens when Pakistan loses its connection for one reason or another, for maintenance reasons or for any technical faults with the underwater cables that allow us to connect to other continents, which is referred to as submarine cables. Okay. The one that specifically connects Pakistan is called the CMEV, and here CMEV actually is an acronym for Southeast Asia, Middle East and Western Europe. So that is the cable that connects us. So oftentimes it is damaged or is under maintenance, and that is when this particular issue actually comes along. Anyways, so now let's move on to our next topic, and that is firewalls. So firewalls are basically a mechanism that allow you to control traffic that is coming in or out of a network. Now it could be hardware or a software or a combination of both. So the concept and the first implementation of firewall technologies are not that new. They actually happened somewhere around the late 80s and the early 90s. So the first time it happened was actually discussed in a research paper in 1989 by a person named Jeffrey Mogul. And he actually did it in a company that is pretty well known, which is Digital Equipment Corporation, or DEC. That's when it was done, and the first firewall that actually became commercially available, because the World Wide Web happened around about the same time, it was called the DEC Seal, and that was in 1992. Anyways, that's just a little bit of history, just to understand that firewalls are not that new. They were designed for this purpose much earlier than the World Wide Web became common usage for public. Remember that the World Wide Web actually started becoming publicly used by 1994. Anyway, so a firewall is actually placed at the level of a network where the level of trust is changing. What do I mean when I say the level of trust is changing? What I really mean to imply is basically the network that is controlled by one particular organization, beyond that point it is controlled by some other organization, or maybe it's the public network, like any gate that is placed on the boundary of some place. So you automatically see, okay, this is our jurisdiction, this is our boundary. You often see that with police stations, they actually refine their boundaries. Okay, this particular area falls under this police station's boundaries. So similarly, firewalls are placed at usually the end of a network, and as soon as it is connected, for instance, the part where you finally, within a network, all of those cables go into a device, and then from that device, that's where they're actually communicating communicating with the internet, which is a public network, that's the point where the firewall would be placed, so that every piece of traffic that goes from that private network, which is your LAN or your your lab computers connected together, or even your home computer systems connected together, that's where you place the firewall, so that you can monitor any kind of data that is going from your network internally to the outside network, or coming from the outside network to coming in, so that anyone who is not supposed to have access to your internal network is stopped at that point. Or if you inadvertently or even on purpose try to access some websites that your network admin or you yourself do not want someone to access outside the network, is stopped right there. So many of the firewalls that we use today are based on the concept of basically examining each of the data packets. Now, what do I mean by data packets? I mentioned this in the class as well. You need to understand when you send requests, when your computer sends requests every time you open up a website, or when you receive data, that actually comes in packets, and all of that data is not stuffed together on one single packet of data and thrown through the same network route. It is actually broken down into several pieces, and they arrive at different times by following different routes. We've discussed this earlier when we talked about routing tables, so refer to that particular discussion that we had in class. And if you still don't get it, as far as I recall, there's an appendix portion in your other book, the one by Mark Stamp, which actually discusses this. Anyways, so firewalls are of several types. Some of them actually allow looking at the packets individually, or at least some of them allow to look at the packets more closely, and there are some that look at the entire communication itself. So let's look at each of these possible ways that firewalls actually work. The first one is packet filtering. This is one of the oldest and also the simplest ways in which firewall technologies work. What really happens is, in this case of a firewall, the firewall actually looks at the source and the destination IP address that is actually written on every single packet of data. Now, it looks at those, and it is also able to look at the port number. Remember that the port number works at the transport layer, okay, and the IP address works at the network layer. The port address actually defines the kind of service that you're running. For instance, you recall that we talked about the fact that HTTP is a protocol that runs on the 80 port on your computer. The FTP runs on the 21 port. So there are several, like the UDP runs on the 6600 series of ports. So you need to know, that all of these can be watched. So every packet contains information about the IP address from where it is coming, and the destination address where it's supposed to reach, as well as the port address of the service that it actually contains data for. So, and even the protocol that it is running on. And remember, the protocol is nothing more than a set of steps. It is basically the software or the set of steps that the protocol must follow or is following for this particular communication. So at the basic most level, this packet filtering actually looks at all of that. Since each packet is actually looked at individually and not related to the other packets that are arriving that may be connected to the same, they actually are going to allow some kind of attacks. I mean, think about it. If one particular packet actually looks absolutely innocent, then a firewall that follows the packet filtering method won't be able to catch it, and it might actually allow it. But together, all of those packets might get reassembled on the other side of the network and be actually malware. So think of it, if I actually cut up a particular, if I'm sending a file that is actually a virus or a malware or any kind of malicious software, but each part of that packet in itself separately is not dangerous, even the firewall would think that it is perfectly fine, because it is showing, absolutely good acceptable things. It is showing a source address that is perfectly fine. It is talking about port address that is also acceptable. Everything else is fine. So a packet filtering firewall may be simple to implement. It is also cheaper. It is also faster for a network, but it is also pretty easy to fool, because each of the separate packets are looked at separately, not as a whole or as part of an entire connection or entire communication. Now, the second type is the stateful packet inspection. In the stateful packet inspection, and the firewalls that use such a packet inspection are referred to as stateful firewalls. They actually follow the basic simple principle that is discussed for packet filtering firewalls, except that they actually keep a much more specific record of all of that. What they do is, while packet filtering actually only looks at individual packets, a stateful packet is able to watch the traffic over a given connection. So one particular time that a particular person has logged into a website, all of the communication that is happening during that time A stateful packet filter will be looking at all of those packets as actually part of one single connection, keeping an eye on it accordingly instead of looking at each packet separately. So it has some understanding on a more higher level to understand that this is actually part of the same connection. So when think of it this way, let's say a particular user is allowed to send data or access data from a website. So they put in the login and password and data starts flowing. And let's say it's a stateful packet filter firewall. So the stateful packet filter firewall will be perfectly fine, understanding that this particular person is allowed to communicate. Let's say all of the other employees that work in that organization are not allowed access to that website. So if they were to try and access the same kind of packets, those packets will not flow, because now the the stateful packet filter firewall understands that this is a different connection, so it won't allow it. So this is why it is actually pretty useful. So most stateful firewalls can actually function as both. They technically can also function like a packet filtering firewall, but they are also capable of looking at the entire state or the entire connection. So this is pretty useful in that way. Then comes what is referred to as a deep packet inspection. Now, the deep packet inspection firewalls add an extra layer of intelligence to any kind of firewall. What they actually do is they actually analyze the actual content. So in most cases, firewalls do not look at what is being sent or received. They just look at who is sending them and for what particular service. So this is a much more deeper level. They can actually see what exact piece of data or information is flowing. So think of it this way, and the analogy that the book gives is, think of the fact that if you're using a normal parcel carrier service like a logistics or a courier service that does not look at what the packets contain, you can send practically anything. But that is not how it usually happens, is it? Most of the logistics services, be it TCS or DHL or FedEx, they actually ask you to show what that particular thing is that you're sending, so that you're not sending something illegal, or you're not sending something that is to be sent in a different box or in a different envelope, and it is going to be charged differently. So a deep packet inspection is extremely useful in the sense that they would actually know what piece of information actually going. So if someone is actually running it, obviously they won't do it for that purpose, but they can technically find out what is it that you're sending. Now the disadvantage of the deep packet inspection, despite having so many advantages, is that obviously it will make your network slow, because every piece of data packet is going to be looked at. So it is pretty good because it is a way of actually monitoring all the traffic that's going in and going out, but it is also a lot slow. So you need to understand it may be an issue with privacy when you found out that the network is actually implementing a deep packet inspection firewall, which actually looks at every piece of packet. So you'll feel like your private information is being looked at. But of course, that information itself could be sent in an encrypted manner. We've already discussed cryptography. But understand that even then, this could be something that people might not like from a privacy perspective. However, this does have its advantages when you're trying to monitor and protect your network and really want to know what is being sent and received by different networks. You might even want to do this because you want to protect any kind of confidential data that is flowing through or might be sent to some outside sources that you do not want to happen. Now, the next topic after this is about proxy servers. Proxy servers are actually like a specialized version of a firewall. So these are actually servers that provide a lot of security and performance features, and usually is good for a specific application or a specific software or a service that you're running, be it email services or web browsing itself. So proxy servers can also create a choke point, which we've already talked about, a point which is like a single connection point that allows data in or out of a particular network segment. So in order to allow us to filter particular traffic for a particular tag or even kind of undesirable content, like for instance, you want to prevent people from accessing a certain type of websites, maybe they have content that you don't want them to view, maybe pornographic content, maybe illegal content, maybe for privacy reasons you don't want that. Or it could even be a kind of a way to protect people from malware, which is like bad software. That particular website might have some software that would cause damage to you, so you want to protect them from it. So this also allows us, these proxy servers also allow us to keep a track. So think of it this way: whenever you're going to be accessing a website and there's a proxy server on the network, what really happens is your request for that website doesn't go directly through the router to the internet to those websites. It's to that website's web server. It actually goes to the proxy server, and the proxy server on your behalf then sends it to the web server of that website, which goes through several routes through the internet. But what this allows is that this allows the proxy server, hence the term proxy, because it is doing it on your behalf, to keep a log. and to check whether or not you're even allowed to access that website. In most cases, this is the way in which they use to actually block certain websites. In fact, this is also the way in which we bypass such security systems to be able to do this. All these proxy servers that allow us to access websites that are not technically allowed, especially for instance when we were using these kind of services for accessing YouTube when it was blocked in our country. This is how we usually use it. So this is how it works. But it can act like a layer of security for any of the devices that are behind it. So it basically becomes a single source for all the requests, and it sends it forward. Now proxy servers are very common in the business world, and they're very common these days, because they allow this filtering capability. So they can actually help us, protect us from email that we don't want, like which is spam email. They can protect us from websites that we can cause damage, or we could even prevent employees from visiting websites that might have some kind of data or things that could be damaging to them. For instance, we want to block social networking sites. This is one way to do it. And several places like banks actually block certain websites so that people are not allowed to send data or receive data or to do any kind of activities that would be considered illegal or wrong. Then there are what is a concept called the DMZ, or a demilitarized zone. Now, to understand the concept of a demilitarized zone, what you need to understand is what does the term mean. Basically, a DMZ is a place between two different borders, which is also referred to as a no man's land. So there is usually a gap between the borders of two countries. You could also understand this concept much better by understanding what is referred to as an airlock. In naval ships, in submarines, in space shuttles and space stations, they have a gate outside in which you enter, and then there's a small room-like place which is referred to as the airlock. You close the outside gate, and it either depressurizes the particular area that you're in, and then you open up the inner gate. This allows us an extra layer of security. Similar to that, we have DMZs in networks. What we can do is, there are several systems that need to talk to external networks. For instance, they need the internet to work. For instance, there are mail servers, there are proxy servers, and maybe even some applications that need to be accessed as a software as a service through the web. However, we don't want all of our network to be available. So what happens is, all of these services are then placed in the DMZ in between. So you can look at the figure in your book, which is 10.2, which actually shows diagrammatically how they work. So you may have an internal firewall behind which you have your entire network, and beyond that firewall would be the DMZ. And in the DMZ would be applications running that would often need to connect to the internet on your behalf. So your request, if you're a computer behind the internal firewall, would to send that request to your internal firewall. That allows it, goes to the DMZ area, and there might be a proxy server there that then allows it further on for an external firewall, which then accesses the internet. So the example here that is given is actually, for instance, if you have a mail server, for instance, which would of course be using the Internet Message Access Protocol, or the IMAP, and the SMTP protocol, which is a simple message transfer protocol for emails. So they would be using ports 143 and 25 to talk to our mail server, and the same ports will then be passing that information to our network. So if no other services are running on the same system, what we can do is we can restrict the traffic that goes inside and outside of the DMZ where the email is. So where the email server is, which is using these particular ports. So we can control whether or not we want to receive emails or want to send emails. So the email server would be in the DMZ, and any kind of request would first go to the DMZ, it would be checked, and then it would be allowed through the internet, or vice versa. So this adds another extra layer of security. That's how DMZs work. Now anyways, the next topic is Network Intrusion Detection Systems, or NIDSs. Network intrusion detection systems are basically, as the name implies, intrusion detection system. What is intrusion? Intrusion is an attack or an infiltration or someone trying to get into the system without our knowledge. So intrusion detection systems generally monitor the network or the host, and host is like a catch-all term or a common term for any computers or any devices, or even it also monitors applications or softwares that are which are connected for any kind of unauthorized activity. So it monitors all of our computers and everything and keeps an eye on them. If they are somehow being accessed by someone outside for any unauthorized activity, something that the network admin does not know or the network is not aware of, that's what the IDSs are protecting you from. So think of it like a guard of the network that keeps an eye on things. Unlike a firewall which is controlling it, an IDS is monitoring it, keeping an eye on whether or not someone is using something that they're not supposed to, or some data is being sent or received at some particular protocol, or using some protocol, or maybe some data is being sent at a certain layer. Anyway, so there are several types of IDSs, which include host-based intrusion detection systems, which are at the at the computer level or the device level. There are application protocol-based intrusion detection systems and network-based intrusion detection systems. So we'll be focusing on the network intrusion detection systems, and we'll talk about the host intrusion detection systems and the application-based intrusion detection systems in chapters 11 and 12, which will be part of this audio recording. Anyway, so the NIDSs, or the network intrusion detection systems, are usually attached to the network in a location where they can monitor any kind of data that is coming in and out of a particular network. So they need to be placed in certain ways so that they're not overloaded. If you place an NIDS behind another filtering device like a firewall, it can help remove a lot of extra stuff. So the NIDS would have a lot less to bother about. So placing it right behind a firewall would help you have less load on the NIDSs. So NIDSs, or the network intrusion detection systems, actually need to examine a lot of data traffic that is coming into a network. So they don't so all they can really do is to just keep a little bit of an eye on what the data is coming and going, and what they can really do is to see whether or not the normal level of network data traffic is going on. So you need to understand, they cannot look at every single piece of data. What they can do is to check, is it the usual kind of network traffic going on, or is some hanky-panky, or is it some kind of suspicious activity? For instance, is that system usually going to be sending a couple of MBs every hour or every minute, or is it some suspicious activity that they're sending a couple of MBs of data every single second, stuff like that. So that is what it actually does. So all they can really do is to monitor things like that. So because of this, an NIDS may miss some types of attacks, particularly any kind of attacks that are actually designed to go through this. So packet crafting attacks, which are designed specifically to create packets of data that carry these pieces of code, can easily avoid detection from IDSs and firewalls and other similar devices. So what we need to do is to have a combination of firewalls and IDSs so that they can support each other, and we can create what is referred to as defense in depth, which is multiple layers of security instead of having one. So people might try to attack because the IDSs are not very specific with packets, but firewalls are. So you need to make a combination of these. Remember that a good network security is not about creating one kind of security device. It's about creating multiple layers, and that is exactly what most organizations do in this day and age. Anyways, the next topic is actually about the details of these IDS detection methods. So we'll talk about each one of these intrusion detection system methods that different intrusion detection systems use, and they are usually classified by the kind of attacks that they actually capture. So there are two main categories of intrusion detection systems. There are what is referred to as signature-based detection systems and anomaly-based detection systems. So we'll be talking about each one of them one by one. So as we said, two different types. So signature-based IDSs work in a way which is very similar to how antivirus systems work. And that's pretty simple. What antiviruses actually do is to have a list of all the possible virus signatures. They basically have a database of how a particular virus would attack. And when a particular kind of traffic comes along, they try and match the kind of pattern of attack with the possible list that they have. Think of it this way. Think of a person who has a list of all possible attacks. So when a particular attack is happening, they can look up on that book and see what kind of patterns happening, and then they can identify the kind of attack is happening and inform the network admin. So this is how the signature based IDSs work, which is very similar to antivirus. Antiviruses get updated over time. What is actually getting updated is the virus definitions, or how a particular virus will behave. Similarly, signature based IDSs also have a database which contains the definitions of the kind of attacks, and they actually compare it, and they therefore inform you. So in general, this method works. However, when a new kind of an attack is about to happen, obviously a signature based IDS won't work, because they yet don't know this new kind of attack, because it is not part of the database. So they would only get updated afterwards. So the point is, the greatest weakness of the signature based IDSs is that they cannot prevent or even inform you about an attack that is a new kind. because that is not part of their database. They have never been taught about it. They have never actually been informed that it has not been updated with that information. So attackers can actually create a new kind of attack or a new kind of pattern, and the IDS won't be able to know. So the other major type of IDS, the other one, is the anomaly-based detection. Anomaly-based, as the name implies, anomaly is anything that is out of the ordinary, anything that doesn't usually happen. So what they do is they actually monitor the network and its traffic on a normal basis. They look at what usual data flows, how it actually flows, which computers send how much amount of data on an average. This becomes what is referred to as their baseline. Now, whenever a particular attack happens, this baseline, this usual traffic is disturbed. This usual behavior of the traffic, of the network traffic, is disturbed. That is how an anomaly-based IDS actually detects patterns of attack, and it knows that this is out of the ordinary. So they would know that this is an attack. So what happens is, when they want to find out new attacks, an anomaly-based IDS would be really good, because it would immediately detect any kind of out of the ordinary or new kind of thing. Imagine this is similar to how a particular law enforcement agencies actually work. They keep an eye on most of the things. Now, as soon as they are out of the ordinary, if they're suspicious, you would immediately inform them. So this is how baseline, this is how they actually function. They actually keep an eye on the regular network behavior and compare it with, and as soon as it makes any changes that are suspicious, they start informing the network admin. So there are some advantages that we may see from the anomaly based ones, but what may happen is there may be many false positives. Even any kind of a new activity, a normal activity which is perfectly authorized activity, might be triggered by the anomaly based IDS as actually being being some kind of illegal activity, but that is not what's happening. So if the traffic on the network changes even the slightest bit from the baseline, the anomaly based IDS might think this is an attack, but it will basically tell you, and then the network admin can decide on it. However, we can actually put both kinds of IDSs for different situations, because each one of them has its own advantage. So we can actually use both of them together, and that is also what happens. We can actually have a signature based and an anomaly based and IDS system to monitor both things. The signature based being good at monitoring normal kind of attacks, and being good at not having too many false positives, which is like it is not an attack but it thinks it's an attack. So it is not usually the case where signature based ones actually make that mistake. But on the other hand, they cannot catch new kinds of attacks, which is what anomaly based IDSs are better at. But anomaly based IDSs are also prone to false positives, so you can have a combination, but the problem is then they might actually take a little longer to identify, but it is a good idea to keep a combination of them both. So now we move to our next major topic within this chapter, which is protecting network traffic. So in addition to protecting your networks from intrusions or invasions from the outside, we also need to look at the traffic that actually flows over them or through them. So in line with the concept of defense in depth, which is like levels of defense, levels of security, we want to also place as many layers of security as is appropriate for the value of what we're trying to secure. So even when we are in an environment that we usually think is secure, there may be a lot of attacks that can happen. So how does that happen? When network is actually flowing, when the data is flowing through the network, what kind of attacks can happen at that point in time, which could be dangerous. So as it says, what would happen can be understood by how much damage it causes us. So let's look at that. So what can happen when your data is intercepted is, and that obviously happens when data is actually traveling, is that they can be misused in several ways. So considering that there are many more networks, public networks these days, that can happen accidentally. I mean, you can expose your data to an attacker quite easily. This may happen. So when you're sending data over a network, it is not secure, especially a network that is a public network, like in a public place. Somebody can eavesdrop on it, or they can get information out of it. Especially because in many cases, in order to speed up our networking, a lot of applications do not use encryption, because obviously that would slow things down, so they don't use it, and that causes a problem. So we may be giving away our usernames and our passwords, our credentials, our credit cards, our banking information, or any kind of personal information that could be stolen. So this is pretty dangerous. So data can also be intercepted from both kind of networks. Don't think that it's just the wireless networks that where someone else could actually get data from. Even a wired network can be just as much susceptible to such an attack. So wireless exposure is of course more common because free wireless internet is something everybody has these days around everywhere, and people like to use it a lot because they just can't control themselves. So what happens is they do not understand the security risk that such kind of services give you. So in general, such networks are set up without any kind of password, and there is no encryption on such networks. It is not protected, and anyone can actually see what data is actually going through. So there is no protection of any kind of confidentiality of any kind of piece of information that is sending. So even in cases where there is a password required for such a network, such as we might find in a hotel or something, the network is usually not encrypted, and the network admin of the hotel could easily sniff it. We don't know. Maybe they're using a stateful packet or even a deep inspection filter firewall, and they are misusing it. We don't know because you've decided to use such a network. So it's a very bad idea to actually do any kind of personal transactions over a public network. It is not worth it. It's just not worth it. Although such insecure networks are a security problem, they are not something that cannot be defeated. What we can do is we can use several such things. For instance, we can use a virtual private network. We can use VPNs to make our particular connection or whatever we are sending to be sent through a virtually private network, which is encrypted. So what happens in a VPN is it actually creates a connection which is like a tunnel that allows you to use the public network, but it only allows you to send your particular data through that tunnel, which is in a secure way. The usual analogy that is pretty helpful to understand for a VPN is to imagine you being on the road in a car, and there are protocol cars all around you, like security cars all around you, and they're making way for you. So you're going through the public network, but you're completely secure. So this is exactly how a VPN actually works. So it creates a kind of a virtual connection which is encrypted between 2 points, and this is done through a VPN client application that you're running, and then obviously another connection on the other end, which is a device which is called a VPN concentrator on the other end. So the client uses a software to talk to the VPN concentrator, and the VPN concentrator agrees, and then the connection is created. So all of the traffic between the network and that VPN goes through this tunnel, like the analogy of the secured car within the public road but surrounded by security cars. So VPNs are often used to allow people who are at a distance to communicate with their internal resources of an organization. So it could be a Salesforce guy working in the field and actually sending data in an encrypted manner to their internal servers, or communicating with them. That could be done through a VPN. So it is very useful, so that because it allows the remote worker to actually do things in a much more secure environment. In addition to allowing to internal resources, VPNs may also be used to protect or even to make an anonymous any kind of traffic that we're sending over untrusted networks or connections. So this is how people usually use it. So there are several companies, such as there's a company called Strong VPN, which actually sell their services to other people. You can actually use their VPNs and they charge you for it. So you can connect to their ISPs. You connect to your ISP and actually go through with their VPNs and send your data. So this would allow you from being actually protecting you from your own ISP as well as by anyone else on the network, or that would be causing you harm. By the way, VPNs are also pretty popular for illegal purposes as well. What happens is people use these VPNs to access websites or even send and receive privately and in an encrypted manner illegal files. So a lot of peer-to-peer networks, like the old ones like Casa and Morpheus and Napster and all of these various apps that allow you to send and receive software, would use VPNs, and they were usually considered as a source of piracy. So that doesn't mean VPN technology is evil or bad, but yeah, it can be used for even that purposes. So VPNs basically allow both kinds of traffic and the actual IP addresses of those who are connecting to actually be hidden. So actual data that you're sending as well as your own IP address, your source and destination, are also hidden. So VPNs can be used illegally. Remember that we also used VPNs in the same way to hide our requests to YouTube when PTA was actually blocking YouTube. So we were accessing it through different VPNs. For instance, people used to do it with Browsec and through ZenMate and Softflux, and there were several others VPNs. This is how they actually function. So wireless network security. So we've already talked about the fact that unsecure wireless networks are a hazard, a security hazard, and anybody could use this. So the current unamplified 802.11. So the wireless networks are referred to as 802.11. The reason we have these numbers for different or different technologies are because the technical documents are numbered this way, which talk about what this is. So the technical document that actually talks about wireless connections is called the 802.11, which is known as the request for proposals, the RFP document. So anyways, that's why it's named that way. Anyway, so in the present record for the unamplified 802 wireless connection is about 237 miles. So this is how much your wireless connections signals are actually available, which are 237 miles. Okay, if it's not amplified. So although this was under ideal condition, does give us some idea of how much our signals are going away. This means that in much less favorable radio frequency environment, like a residential area or someone miles away with the right kind of antenna could actually be monitoring your network. Think about it. Your wireless connection networks in a normal environment, which is like does not have buildings around and all, can go for really, really far away. But in those places, even if there are buildings and other interferences, even then your connection is actually can be caught at further away. So if someone has the right kind of antenna, they can actually catch your network Wi-Fi connections, and if they're able to break it or intrude into it or crack the password, they can access all your network traffic. So it is pretty dangerous. So in addition to the issues of our traffic being potentially listened on, there is also the possibility of the issue of wireless devices being placed without our knowledge. So they might connect different Wi-Fi devices on your network once they know the password and you don't even know about it, and turn it into wireless access points, and then they could practically access everything in your network. So this happens in places and this is pretty dangerous because these are referred to as rogue access points. So basically someone else has put in another router or another Wi-Fi adapter or a connection or even a computer within your network and you don't even know about it. So for example, it talks about if you worked in an area where Wi-Fi was actually prohibited, and we might find that some guy can actually bring an access point of their own and they can install it on their desk to provide Wi-Fi to a certain area. Now this might not have been done with anything evil in their mind, but this can easily be used by someone to access the network of that organization by going through that device. So if rogue access points that we talked about in our example are set up with without any passwords or no security or no encryption, it would be twice as worse. So basically, even if you have a really, really powerful network security, one rogue access point would destroy it all. So that's like some guy making a new door in your entire house, which is very well secured, just so it is easy for them to come and go. And that alone will destroy you, right? So this is pretty dangerous. The simple solution is to find such rogue equipment and ask them to be documented so that they also are made part of the network infrastructure. So this is the same kind of process we follow in very many organizations. I mean, even if you want to bring a device on your own, you have to tell the network admin about it. Otherwise, the network admin should look for them for such devices and remove them, identify them, and even prosecute people who are doing this, because this could be very dangerous for the organization. So for any kind of legitimate authorized networks that are actually allowed, we need to have some kind of a method to protect them. So most of these 802.11 wireless devices use encryption, and one of the most common group of wireless network devices follow different kinds of security. So there are three different kinds. There is wired equivalent privacy, or WEP. There is Wi-Fi protected access, or WPA, and there is Wi-Fi protected access version 2. Obviously, which is called WPA2. Now you may recognize these names when you're actually trying to connect to different Wi-Fi's on your cell phone. So different Wi-Fi networks have different levels of security. The most secure one is WPA2, and this is what you should be using on your Wi-Fi devices at home. So make sure that you're protected using either WPA or WPA2 security measures. So it would actually give you the strongest security. Then comes the topic about secure protocols. Now, one of the simplest and easiest way to send to protect our data is, of course, to use better protocols. So one of the many older protocols that are still used is the FTP, or the file transfer protocol. And there's another protocol called the Telnet protocol, which is used to interact with remote machines or any kind of devices that are outside your network. And then there is another protocol called the post office protocol, which is used for getting email from a particular server. Not sending emails, but just to get them. It's also called the POP3 protocol. Anyways, and there are several others which do all of different kinds of things. The problem with each one of these protocols, the FTP, the Telnet, and the POP server protocols, is that they are very insecure. So such protocols are actually sending very sensitive data in plain text format. So they don't use encryption. So they're very, very dangerous. And obviously anyone who's gaining access to your network, if your entire password is like flowing through the network without encryption, that's pretty dangerous, right? So anyone listening on a network could easily get that information. So there are many insecure protocols that now have secure versions, and it is recommended that you use those protocols instead. For instance, just to keep it very, very simple, one of the commonmost protocols that is used to access websites is the HTTP. But there's a secured version for it called the HTTPS, or the Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secured, and it is recommended that you use that. Google Chrome, for instance, now enforces users to only access websites that are HTTPS compliant. And if they do not use HTTPS, it would actually tell you, or at least cross out the HTTPS on the web browser's address bar. Check it out the next time you're browsing on a website. Anyways, so instead of operating over command line with telnet, which basically allows you to communicate or talk to different devices that are outside the network, you should perhaps use secure shell or SSH. And instead of sending files through FTP, you should be sending it with a new version of the FTP called the Secure File Transfer Protocol, which is also based on the SSH. So yes, they are a little slower, but they're also more secure. So security over time is always a good idea. SSH is a very handy protocol for secure communication, so that you can send data and over it. It can be used for file transfer, or even to access a computer that is, like, for instance, I can be sitting in my office and accessing a computer that is actually in some other remote location, in some other office, or even at home. So I can access it through my computer. So that would be better done through SSH or secure shell. So it can be used for file transfer or terminal access. Terminals here are referring to computers, or even to securely communicate to other remote desktops, or communicate over a VPN, or even when you're actually connecting to different hard disks that are on some other system. The encryption that is used by the SSH is actually called the RSA, which is a public key cryptographic algorithm system. It's one of the most powerful and strongest systems that we have these days. Remember, not perfectly powerful, there's no such thing, but very, very powerful, very secure. Then comes the topic, another main topic of this particular chapter, which is about mobile device security. Now, mobile devices are becoming more and more common. We already know that, and they are very powerful because we use them all the time. They have a lot of hardware and software resources and the capabilities. Now, the fact that we move them with them all the time from one particular network area to another also causes a lot of issues. Plus, the point is that most of the security compliances that we do that we do on a non-mobile related computer are not going to be applied, because the cell phone moves around, right? You're carrying it. So we need to be very careful with the kind of security mechanisms of a mobile phone. So what is a mobile device? So we hear the term mobile device when we talk mostly about smartphones or tablets, which is like smartphones from Google's Android, or even Apple iOS, or even Windows phones, or any other operating system. But there are several other things that are now becoming part of mobile devices. For instance, any kind of head-mounted devices. That could be the HTC Vive, which is the virtual reality helmet made by HTC, or it could be the Microsoft HoloLens, or it could be Google Glass, or several other devices that we carry around. It could even be smartwatches, which are very common these days, and other devices. We also have what is referred to as USB or USB flash drives or thumb drives. Those are also part of it. So mobile devices are used to send and receive emails, or to browse the internet, or just in short, there's a lots of devices that are common these days that do almost the same kind of things that a non-mobile device like a desktop or a laptop, comparatively speaking, can also do. So the definition of what is or is not a mobile phone is constantly changing. I mean, there was a time that people would only call cell phones or mobiles as mobile phones, not tablets, or not two-in-one laptops, which allow you to remove the tablet, the screen and use it as a tablet. So these days, we've got several such devices. So presently, we have smartphones, which are much more powerful than computers that we had just a couple of years ago. So this is why, on the other hand, there are also, there's another branch of computers that are coming up, which are very cheap and low-powered, and low processing capability systems too, like Raspberry Pi, or even the way that I use it. For instance, I have a USB flash drive which has an entire operating system installed, and I plug it into a computer and run, and it's basically what is referred to as Chrome OS. So there are several such devices are coming up, and that's why it's becoming more of a question of trying to understand these devices to be able to better protect them. So one of the potential areas where the difference between mobile and other devices is visible is from the security perspective, and especially from the central management of the data itself on such devices. So how would we manage such devices? So we will now talk about mobile device management. Now, what do you mean by that? While most of the devices are not running, most of the devices are not running on a mobile operating system, which is like, all the other devices like Windows-based devices or Mac OS devices or Linux-based ones. They have a lot of security tools that are already there. And we generally are able to force them to be patched, and we can force them to have software upgrades. We can force change on passwords on them from time to time. We can force a lot of policies on them and have control them. In order to enable this, we generally run a lot of services. But what do we do for mobile phones? For mobile phones, we need to run a particular set of applications which is referred to as mobile device management. And there are several companies who actually make them. For instance, one called Good Technologies, another called Mobile Iron, and then several others. So the exact way that an MDM solution works depends from particular organization to another. But what they all do is they basically install a particular software or an app on the mobile device, which actually controls how that mobile phone is supposed to interact with the system. So it doesn't look at your data, it actually enforces things on you. So how you access the email, or how you access different network resources, or how they particularly access something, so that if they're stolen, this central app which is running on the server of the network admin can control your cell phone. So think of it this way: your cell phone has an app, or your mobile device has an app that connects to a particular server that the network admin controls, and this is referred to as the mobile device management server or the mobile device management software. And if your phone is stolen or is compromised, they would know about it. Or when you leave, they would then trigger the application. So they'll basically, using that particular service, they can actually enforce different things on your mobile device. So they can force you to change your password regularly or to be patched. So they can set your updates to be auto updated even if you don't want to do it. So as the distinction between mobile and non-mobile devices become more and more narrower, and now they're similar in many ways, many of these MDM solutions software providers have started to implement support of some devices that wouldn't be that would traditionally be considered non-mobile. So they now also have these applications which are a mixture of both, through which you can actually control desktops and laptops as well as mobile phones. These are referred to as enterprise management tools. So that from one location, the network admin can control both kinds of them. So it becomes easier for them to manage it across multiple networks. Anyways, so then the concept that we've already discussed about, which is also a security hazard, comes into play, which is bring your own device situations, where organizations allow people to bring their own device and use them. And this is often brought up when we're talking about mobile device security, because in several places people are allowed to bring their own tablets and their own mobile phones. So imagine if we have desktops that are actually given by the organization, they can force different security mechanisms on them. But what happens if we allow people to bring in mobile devices or tablets or laptops of their own? Then this usually happens because organizations cannot afford to have devices for everyone. So what happens is these devices, which are technically being used within the organization, within that network, can compromise the network security of that place, because, well, they are owned by those people. So we need to allow only organization-owned devices. But if you cannot do it for whatever reasons, you need to have controls through the MDM, the mobile device management system, to not allow people to do certain things. So for instance, they are not supposed to install particular apps, or not be allowed to install apps, or they could be forced to not use particular services, or could be forced to do several things. So this is very important, especially in that context. So choosing the other end of the spectrum, what we can do is we can either enforce we can either force people to only use devices that are given by the organization, or we can actually allow them to use it and do so through the MDM. So if you have an MDM based system, you can control them from there. So although some tools do exist that allow minimal control over such devices, connecting them to a central mail server or a central service without constantly monitoring it, constantly finding it, or patching it or forcing it, but that's how they find it. So in most organizations, they find a middle ground, where they actually have a mix of people who bring their own devices as well as devices. This is what happens in our university. It's a combination. Some people bring in their own devices, their own laptops, their own desktops, and there are several people who have devices that are given to them by the university itself. So it's a kind of a combination. So in this way, we can allow more secure and trusted devices access to more resources. What can be done rather is that the devices that are actually owned by the organization are given more level of access within the organization's various services, and those which are owned by the people themselves would be limited, or at least you could have an MDM client installed on those devices that they're bringing in from home and monitor them through those. So let's talk about different network security tools. So there are several network security tools that are usually used to protect systems and to monitor them and to only allow authorized access. So it would not be sensible to actually talk about those because that's not what our course covers. But yeah, there are several to do so. So there are enormous number of security tools. There is one reference to a particular one which is actually pretty useful that has also been linked. They run on many Linux servers as well. And Linux systems. One is called the Kali.org. You can find Kali on Kali.org, and then there are several, and it allows assessments of different networks. So it can allow us to do a lot of penetration testing and stuff. You should look it up if you want. And for wireless, let's talk about different apps that can be used for wireless networks. So attackers that are trying to access wireless devices can go through all of them, and they could actually access it. So there is a particular set of tools which are known to detect any such devices that could be be trying to access you basically it's an app that allows you to identify whether a particular network device is unauthorized and can be accessed by someone else from the outside. So this particular app is called Kismet and actually runs on Linux and can be found on the Kali.org website that we talked about earlier. And there is another kind of software which does also a similar thing, which is called NetStumbler, which works for Windows, although it doesn't have as many features as Kismet does for Linux. So in addition to these, there are several wireless devices, ways to detect wireless devices that are rogue, that you don't know about, that would enable you to break a lot of encryptions. And there are several such devices. For instance, there are also tools that allow you to break the passwords of different Wi-Fi's, but these are used to identify and to find out the weaknesses in your system. These are not designed for you to go and hack. There are also what is referred to as port scanners, because these port scanners are actually ways to identify and find which ports are open, which shouldn't be. The ports are, by the way, for the services. They work on the transport layer, as we talked about earlier. So there are two basic types. There are port scanners and there are vulnerability scanners, and they have a lot of overlapping in them. So one of the most famous port scanners that is usually used and is also free tool is called Nmap, which is short for network mapper. So Nmap is generally referred to as a port scanner, but it does a lot of stuff. It can do port scans to find out if there are devices on the network that have different it can actually help you find out what kind of operating systems they are running, and the versions of different services and applications they're running, and which ports are open. Ports are like doors into the network. So they should only be open when a particular service is being used and should be closed otherwise. So that's like leaving a door open. So port scanners help us find out if there are any ports that are open that should be closed. So for the most part, in terms of network security, scanners are pretty useful for this purpose. So we'll talk more about them when we talk about operating system security in chapter 11. So there are also devices called packet sniffers, which actually are also referred to as network or protocol analyzers or packet sniffers. What they do is they sniff and check every piece of packet that is coming in or out of the system. So they're not designed to steal people's data, but they're designed to keep an eye on stuff. So one of the key elements that for a sniffer to work is to allow different data traffic that is going in and out. So we need to be able to have access to that level. But remember that it is not designed to actually cause harm to anyone. It's designed to keep an eye on things. So one of the most famous packet sniffers is Wireshark, which was also known as Ethereal, and it is very powerful, and there's also a figure of it on 10.3. So you can look at every kind of data that is going in and out of your system, what protocol it is using, what kind of port address it's using, what kind of IP addresses is it coming from, where is it going. So this is pretty powerful. Wireshark is very good for identifying this. Plus it's very good for identifying any kind of problems that are coming in your network. Again, it is not used to hijack or hack someone's data or to identify it, but used to keep an eye on things on the network. And again, if the data is encrypted, they can't really read it. Kismet, which we've talked about in the wireless section, is also a specialized kind of a sniffer, and it also sniffs but it only sniffs for wireless networks. and there may be several other packet sniffers in hardware form as well, which is like a device. There's one called OptiView Portable Network Analyzer, which is made by Fluke Networks, and there are several others. Now let's come to a concept called honeypots. Now honeypots is actually a term which is, well, a pot of honey. So there is another way of security, and that is, instead of defending yourself, you do what is offensive for the hacker. So what is done is we create a particular area in our network which is designed to attract a hacker, or rather so that we can catch them red-handed. So a honeypot is a kind of a part of a network that can detect, monitor, and sometimes even tamper with the activities of an attacker. So we are trying to attract them so that we can catch them. It's like a trap. So honeypots are configured to deliberately show weaknesses, even though there may be none, but we're still doing them. For instance, you might put up files on a server and call them passwords, or confidential file, so that you want the attacker to come and attack and try and get that file, and then you can catch them. It's like a bait. Like a way of attracting the enemy so that we can catch them red-handed. So one of the interesting things about honeypot is that the vulnerabilities or data that is left out as a bait to the attacker is actually false. There is no secret thing there, but it's just there to attract them. So in reality, honeypots are actually configured to display these items so that the people would actually try and get in, and you can catch them. So you can also make large honeypots, like lots of you can make many honeypots instead of having one or two files, and these are referred, even an entire network can be set up to be like weak so that someone will attack it. Such a honeypot is actually called a honey net, so that you can have multiple honeypots in it, and you can find various configurations and various vulnerabilities so that you can identify various weaknesses. So honey nets can be particularly useful, especially when you're trying to identify large scale malware activity and you're trying to catch them. So it's really useful in that way. So you can even look up on honey nets and honeypots on honeynet.org, so you can find out how it's actually done. So there are several firewall tools that we should also be using. So in our kit of network tools, we may find such tools as well, which can help us find weaknesses in our network design, especially in our firewalls. One of these tools is called HPing3, which is a well-known tool for such purposes. It was specially designed to help us for a protocol that is called Internet Control Message Protocol, and it can help you with that. And there are several other tools that also help us with firewalls. Some are mentioned, and well, others you can look up. So that's the end of this particular chapter, and we will now be continuing with operating system security, which is chapter 11. And I hope you've been able to understand whatever we talked about in this particular chapter.